Hi everyone, my name's Hilary Nunns. Welcome to this Meet the Expert session. I'm really pleased to be able to say that I've been joined today by Sarah Townsend. Sarah works in an area that probably many of you don't have much experience in, and maybe you'd like to have more experience or a better understanding of the area. And Sarah's going to talk us through some of the things that we might want to know about life in a supported learning environment. So welcome Sarah, thank you very much for joining me today. Can you talk me through your background a little bit?
Yes, okay. As you can see on the slide, there's lots of logos and it looks like I've had hundreds of jobs, but actually most of my experience has been working within the same field, and sometimes I would do 2 or 3 jobs because they were part-time. When I first started work, I worked at Orchard Hill College. That was my very first job as a learner support assistant. So I've come through the ranks really from being a learner support assistant. And in Surrey I was a day service officer. I worked in day services for a while. I've also worked in voluntary organisations, helping to set up programmes and projects and running daycare services for young children. And also I've been a family link carer, so I used to foster someone who came to our house at weekends to give their family respite care. She was a young girl with cerebral palsy and she was deaf as well. So I've had lots of experience, and in various roles I've been an assistant, and I've also managed departments as well.
So actually you're coming at it from a lot of different angles, but we're probably particularly going to look at it in terms of an educational environment today. So tell me then, how did you become involved in a supported learning environment?
Okay, well, from a very early age, from the age of 5, I knew I wanted to work with people with learning disabilities, and I started doing voluntary work at the age of 13 and went to college and got my social care course. My first job, as I said, was at Orchard Hill, and that was in an education environment, and I was a support worker, so I was just supporting the tutor at that stage. I went on to support in various different areas in different hospitals, because at that time most people with learning disabilities were still living in long-stay institutions. This was in the early 80s. I then moved on to social services, and that's when I worked there for, I don't know, a few years. I realised that actually education was the place I wanted to be, because I could see how people were progressing, and I wanted to move people on and help them develop skills to help them become more independent. So I moved back into the environment of education, and really that's where I stayed from then on in.
Okay, that's interesting. So you moved over there, and presumably all the backgrounds that you'd had in your various different environments created this bank of knowledge that you can then transfer quite easily to an education environment. Were you a qualified teacher at this time?
I had done part of my Cert Ed. I had done, it was called something different then, but I had done stage 1 and stage 2 of my teaching certificate very early on. So I had got some qualifications, but I hadn't got my Cert Ed. I moved into education again, and all the experience from the social side, the social services and the families and parents help, because some of the issues that come with people when they're in education are not just the education difficulties they have, but also the social difficulties.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so we are living with all of these acronyms, and in a supported learning environment you've got different acronyms than you have in a mainstream environment. So can you explain what these mean, please?
Yeah, there's acronyms everywhere. Wherever we go, there's acronyms. So what we've got here, we've got LDD, which is learning disabilities and difficulties. It covers a multitude of sins, really. It is a general term that can be used for people with learning disabilities, people with dyslexia, with dyspraxia, mental health. It can be a whole group of people.
And what's MLD? Because that's one that we've
moderate learning disabilities. It means moderate learning disabilities.
Moderate. Because sometimes I've understood that to be mild, but it means moderate.
Yes, there is. People do use the term mild learning disabilities, but the terminology there isn't actually. If you look into like statementing and that, the term doesn't actually exist.
Interesting. So it's moderate.
Yes, moderate.
And what's SLD?
SLD is severe learning disabilities.
Right. And PMLD?
Is profound and multiple learning disabilities.
Profound and multiple learning disabilities. So if somebody has PMLD, what condition might that be?
Well, it would be a complex condition. So it might be, it could be autism, but they could also have Down syndrome and hearing impairment and a sight impairment at the same time. So it would be a quite a, what am I trying to say? They would need quite a lot of support because they'd have lots of
more than one.
Yes, complex needs.
Yes, multiple being the operative word there. So where if they were individual profound needs, it wouldn't impair them completely, but because there's multiple profound needs, that makes it harder. Okay. So what does the term learning disability mean?
Well, learning disability, there is a lot of debate. Sometimes when I go into colleges, people get muddled up between learning disabilities and learning difficulties.
Yeah.
That's because sometimes in the past the term learning difficulties has been given to people with learning disabilities.
Okay.
So there's a confusion about the difference between that. But if we're looking at the terms that people have used in the past to describe someone, they can be, which really now aren't politically correct, but it could be like a slow learner, someone who finds it more difficult to learn. What other terms do people used to call them when they were in long-stay institutions? Mentally handicapped.
Yes.
Really means that they have difficulty learning.
Yeah, and there are some very unkind terms when I was growing up as well, which I know we don't use anymore, but they are playground insults, really.
They are.
Which is awful when you think about the reality of it. Words such as retarded and which means really what you're talking about, a slow learner, someone who doesn't learn in the same way.
And in America, they sometimes use the word still, mental retardation.
Do they? Right.
Yeah. So, you know, they are quite offensive words because most people with all people with a learning disability have some abilities. It's just that we need to support them to get them the potential out of them.
Okay. So a couple of things here. So definition of a learning disability.
Yeah. Well, this is really to reinforce that it's a learning disability we're talking about and not a learning difficulty.
Okay.
So someone with a learning disability will have a lifelong condition. It won't go away, and it's normally comes about before adulthood. Sometimes they're born with it, with a condition, and sometimes it is because of accidents and brain damage. But basically they will have difficulty understanding information, learning new skills, and find it difficult to cope independently. So they will need a lot of extra support.
Right. So they perhaps wouldn't ever be living independently.
Some people may never be living independently, no.
Okay. And profound learning disability.
So as we've already said, a person with a profound learning disability is going to have a lot of difficulties. They're going to maybe have complex needs. Their communication tends to be non-verbal. If they are able to communicate verbally, it might be one or two words. They will find it difficult to express their views and opinions, their likes and dislikes. So they might present with challenging behaviour because people are misinterpreting what they're saying.
Okay, yeah.
They tend to have sensory difficulties as well. So they might be blind or hearing impaired on top of that. So they need a lot of support.
So the next one we've got is the severe learning disability.
Okay, so when we're looking at a person with severe learning disabilities, they might be someone maybe with Down syndrome or autism, but they need a lot of support. They may not be able to live independently, and they might have difficulty communicating. So they would need help with making choices and things like that. So in an education environment, they are likely to be in a supported learning department.
Okay, yeah.
They may be able to go into mainstream with the right support, and when we worked in Croydon, some of the people there were in art classes and different types of classes with the right support. Yeah. But they do need one-to-one usually.
An LSA one-to-one sort of thing. And then we've got moderate, which was the...
Yes, so these people would likely to be in mainstream classes. They may need a little bit of extra support. They may have difficulties understanding social concepts, and might need some help with money, and literacy may be difficult for them.
In fact, this is probably where the area that I've had the most experience, because teaching in mainstream classes, maybe at entry or level 1 classes, that there will be students in there with an LSA who do need support, not with their learning necessarily, but with other issues. So that's moderate learning disability. Excellent. What's this about?
Sorry. Well, basically, when we're talking about people needing support and looking at strategies to develop when working with students, some people will find the written word quite difficult to understand. It is therefore quite important to reinforce some words, and obviously this is a good way of doing that. Okay, so symbols are quite useful, as I said, to reinforce words. For people with moderate learning disabilities, and sometimes those with severe learning disabilities. So when you're in a kitchen, for example, you could have symbols on the doors to represent where you might find the saucepans or the knives. Not everybody understands symbols because they are sometimes quite a difficult concept, and the problem with symbols is that there are different symbols. So you will get Makaton symbols and widget symbols, which all have different pictures. So you have to be consistent when you're using symbols to make sure you use the same ones all the time, otherwise it confuses people.
I didn't realise that. I didn't realise that widget and Makaton didn't.
Yeah, they are different. And then there's also people now use change, which is more of a picture, an abstract drawing. So there's lots of different symbols that can be used, and sometimes there isn't a symbol for the word you want. So when you're developing resources, you cut and paste Google pictures and things like that. And that can be quite challenging for learners if there's lots of different pictures.
I hadn't thought about that. So this is one way of communicating with pictures. Makaton, widget, and also sign language, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, Makaton is a form of sign language. It was developed for people with learning disabilities, so it was based on the signs of British Sign Language, but it is used in the way you speak. So with British Sign Language, when you sign, you don't actually speak the words, but with Makaton, you speak as you sign, because you're trying to encourage someone to understand what you're saying and encourage them, if they can, to speak. They also have symbols to back up what the signs are, so that's why there's a difference between widget symbols and Makaton symbols. But basically it's a simpler form, so if you were signing, you might only sign 2 or 3 of the words in a sentence instead of all the words.
Oh, I see, okay. So that's why it's not literally translatable then?
Yes, that's right, and that's why if you're working with deaf people, you'd use British Sign Language, because that's a whole language, and you can interpret anything that someone is saying into sign language, whereas Makaton, it is quite a basic level. It's in 10 stages, and it starts off very basic on food and drink and the needs of people, and does go up to emotions and things, but you wouldn't be able to translate everything.
Okay, interesting, thank you. Well, I want to know then, considering the work that you do, why do you think there are negative attitudes towards people who've got learning disabilities, whether they're moderate, severe or profound?
Oh, well, where do we start? I'm studying at the moment. I'm doing a master's in profound and multiple learning disabilities, and I've just had to write an essay on this. And it goes right back to when people were in institutions, the sort of negative attitudes that they were dangerous and locking them away from society. So if you speak to the older generation, older than us, they, as children, were brought up to believe they were dangerous. So that has sort of come out into society. But also, as people have grown up, say for instance my daughter and her generation, who are 16, 17, 18, they are not aware, they haven't come across many people with a learning disability. So I think it's sometimes ignorance and fear and that type of thing. They don't know how people might not behave in the way you expect them to behave, and so they're a bit concerned and worried about it, I suppose.
So it's just about knowledge, or lack of knowledge?
I believe that is the most important thing, to educate people so they have an understanding of the diverse group of people that live in our community.
And it's not just in education, is it? It has such a widespread impact. So anybody in, for example, the post office or in the doctor's surgery, anywhere where we all need to access facilities and services. It's not just education, it's a widespread issue. That
it's really important. I've done some training with the police force because they find that quite difficult. If they're dealing with an emergency, on the spur of the minute they've got to make a snap judgment on the person they're confronted with. And they don't always know the signs of learning disability, and it's really important for people to have that understanding so that they're not making a snap judgment, that they're just presenting as very difficult people. It's because of their disability that they're acting in that way.
Yeah. So knowledge is everything, basically.
Definitely.
And it can improve everybody's outcomes.
It can, yes.
Well, talk me through this accredited opportunity that you've developed then for others.
As we said, we've worked together in the past, and we've looked at trying to develop a suite of qualifications to support people working in colleges. Both Hilary and I have worked in lots of colleges where we feel that staff want qualifications that are practical and easy to achieve. They don't want to do a whole year's course for something. So we've developed qualifications. I particularly have written a qualification about understanding the needs of people with profound and multiple learning disabilities. Because more people are coming into mainstream colleges, and learner support assistants are being expected to work in those departments and sometimes have little knowledge of those people.
So is it actually the one that you've written for PMLD, is that for any environment? For people working in any environment?
It's about understanding the needs of people with PMLD, and it can be in any environment. So I've been training people in Newham that work into the social care setting and things like that.
Right.
But the most important thing about working with a person with PMLD is to understand their communication. And if you can understand their communication, then you'll be much more skilled to be able to support them in an education environment.
Okay. So if you were to gain the qualification in meeting the needs of someone with profound and multiple learning disabilities at level 2 or level 3, you could put that on your CV to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding about legislation, about
it covers legislation, communication, basic needs of a person, and the health needs, because most people with profound and multiple learning disabilities have complex health needs as well. It looks at values, your values and society's values. And then there's a whole exciting bit that I really enjoy, is where we develop sensory stories. So they're stories that you could use when you're working in college, and we develop those, and you create a story and perform it in the day, and it's quite a lot of fun. We have lots of resources and things.
So apart from the PMLD, you've alluded to the fact that there are others on the way, and I know that we offer, we provide training non-accredited, but all of these subjects that are here now, we're also developing an accredited program for.
That's right. We're trying to look at developing. We are developing learner support practitioners training course, where there will be an element of a core module, which has a module where people look at their roles and responsibilities and maybe barriers to learning in general for people with mental health, PMLD, ADHD, those types of things. And then we're going to look at specialising, so people can pick and choose different modules that suit them or that they want to learn more about, or where areas that they want to move into. So we're going to develop mental ill health, a smaller unit for PMLD, so you haven't got to do the longer one, which will just focus maybe on the communication and the sensory stories. Learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, those types of things, all those things where students need extra support.
A small safeguarding module as well.
That's right.
So overall, if it's called a learning support practitioner course, what you're saying is that you can have, there's one that you have to do, and then you can pick and choose the ones that suit you better. Okay, well I know we're working on it at the moment, and overall it will be something that most people will be able to find useful in the area that they want to work in. But most of the training I've seen before doesn't include PMLD units for a small unit, and that's good, because a lot of LSAs and teachers for that matter would like to go and work in that environment, but perhaps need a bit of coaxing or want to know more about it before they take that step.
I think the issue in the past is that most people have been in specialist units or away in college out of borough, whereas now legislation is encouraging people, colleges, to develop provision within their local environment, and that is where a lot of colleges are now looking for staff that have got the experience or wanting the desire. You need to have a desire to work with people with PMLD and have some knowledge, and so that little bit of training will help you.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Sarah. Look, I've got just to let everybody know how to contact Sarah if you want to have more information about the training that she offers, if you want to discuss some students that you have that perhaps are showing signs and you're not sure how to work with them. Call Sarah. That's her website there, disabilitylearning.co.uk. We can email her, and there's a telephone number there as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and thanks Sarah for coming along today for this interview, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye for now.